Hello, dear listener. Welcome to the Future Seeds podcast. I'm your host, Cyprian, and in this show, I explore groundbreaking solutions to our world's unique problems by connecting seemingly unrelated fields such as technology, ecology, community, and spirituality. The speaker for this episode is Martin Winiecki, and we will be discussing topics that have increasingly become taboo, such as deep trust amongst human beings, the real place of love in a society, and the problem that arises from developing technologies faster than we develop our own consciousness. So I'm here in South Portugal with Martin Winiecki in this community called Tamera. Martin, could you tell us a little bit about Tamera, when the project started, what it's all about, why is this community so special, and tell us a little bit about you as well.
Tamera is a peace research and education center. The project has been going for 40 years, and it's a kind of research project on the question of how can we create conditions for a non-violent and regenerative culture. So Tamera is a social and ecological experiment, if you will, and we are trying to create, in a way, a blueprint for a non-violent culture. And I have been part of this project for 12 years. Now I am leading the Institute for Global Peace Work, also the building that we are in here, which is our communications and networking department.
Well, you have quite a job. Could you tell me very quickly what are the main projects or activities that you lead within the community?
With that goal of creating this blueprint for a nonviolent culture, which we call a healing biotope, we kind of have three main threads of how we are doing that. The first one is actually research and modeling that kind of type of society ourselves. So we are researching in ecology, in technology, in community building, in love schools. So we're also communication with animals. We have a children's center. So we are trying to kind of model the basic areas of life in accordance to a culture that fosters trust and cooperation. And really reimagine life. And then we also, the second thread is education. So we are running programs for an increasing number of people and projects in the world, create similar types of communities to model a different society.
Well, these are all beautiful and ambitious projects. How does Tamera interact with the world? What are your links with the outside world? What projects do you lead outside the community?
So, one is the Defend the Sacred Alliance. So this is a network that we have been facilitating since 2017. It really was strongly inspired by the movement of indigenous water protectors at Standing Rock, their fight against the Dakota Access Pipeline that drew in many, many people from many different camps and ideologies and cultures unified in their stand for the water, for the earth. So we are trying to bring together leaders of different movements and to create a kind of incubator for a more sacred activism, if you will. We are running online education, also intending to create more of a online platform also for people that want to connect deeper and learn from Tamera and the vision of healing biotopes. And another one is a program we call the Global Campus, which is a support for communities, especially in the Global South, that have been building communities with this intention of modeling regenerative autonomy, inner transformation, trust building. So communities that are already quite far developed in terms of creating healing biotopes. And so this is a program to support them in their community building questions, but also with knowledge about ecological restoration, clean energy technologies, and these kinds of things.
Tamera is far from being a bubble. You're very connected to the outer world.
Yeah, increasingly, I would say.
Could you say quickly what you found out about what are the main lessons you've learned during all those years about the human being as an individual, and what do we actually long for, what makes us happy, what makes us feel safe or fulfilled, and also as a group, what do we really want and need from relationships and community?
Okay, I would say the first thing is that like when you engage in this kind of radical experimentation in community building, in different forms of coexistence, you see that actually many of the myths about human nature that we have been that we've been internalizing in this dominant culture, that they are simply not right. Violence is not necessary to keep order in society. War is not necessary to resolve conflict. Jealousy and fear is not necessary, in relationships. It's not necessary to destroy some kind of being of nature and demean it as a pest. But, there are different, you kind of venture into a different matrix of life. You see that when you also see how, in a way, malleable people are to the social structure that they live in. So, this was a very Marxist idea of, it's the social being that determines consciousness. And in a way, it's very true. If you live in a society that is oriented towards competition, use value, productivity, then on the social side and on the consciousness side, you develop competition, fear. You are actually you live a very contracted and disconnected, alienated way of life. But if you create conditions that are oriented towards cooperation, towards trust, towards actually unfolding and finding back the meaning for which we are here in life, you see that people develop very different forms of behavior. So people, when they have the possibility to show themselves truthfully to one another and to see the other and to see themselves in the mirror of the other, they, for example, develop the intrinsic wish to support one another, even in places where, from a normal point of view, we would think this is absolutely impossible. So, for example, two people who love the same person, usually this is where everything breaks. But actually, if those people are part of a trusting community, they will support each other. So they are very different. So in a way, I think the biggest discovery of Tamera was that there is a different structure of reality that we can discover when we no longer follow the whimsies of this crazy culture, but we actually follow the question of why are we here as humanity? What is the dream that wants to unfold through us? We discover a different matrix of life. We call it the sacred matrix. And it's also not just limited to human beings. You cannot find meaning for humanity if you take humanity out of the context of the community of life that we are part of. In a way, this is also a big myth, this idea that the human being is the lord of creation, the world was created for us. So this whole idea of the anthropocentric idea created, in a way, put humanity off, put us in a very alienated bubble. But when we reconnect with the community of life, in a way also pick up an indigenous original knowledge, which says that actually we are here to steward the community of life, because all living beings are our relatives, our brothers and sisters. Then you actually see that humanity can only find its meaning in the mirror of that community, because we are an organ. We are, in a way, the only see that in a true sense, not in a dominating sense, when we again allow for this insight that comes through empathy, that opens in connection with this community of life.
What do you think is the key to start changing the paradigm, to just start going into a different direction?
Yeah, whether it's climate breakdown or whether it's fascist resurgence or whether it's also the rise in addiction and suicide rates. I think all these phenomena are not separated from one another, but it's not like different crises intersecting somehow, but it's different symptoms of this one and the same fundamental root cause. And that is a civilization that is in contradiction to the very principles of thriving life. So our civilization has been built around an ideal and around memes, you could say, cultural values that have led to a global system that is really centered around destroying life in the most systematic and insidious way possible. I mean, how is it possible that we are accepting and that we are thinking that a system that is really based on the ravaging of our natural home is the only one that's realistic? This is, it's. David Attenborough said this beautiful sentence: if you believe in infinite growth on a finite planet, then either you're a madman or an economist. But this is like, this is where we are in, and I think it is important to know that every culture is only a culture because it shares a certain set of stories, a certain set of values that bring people together in a shared space in which they can interact. So if we want to change this deadly trajectory that we are on, we have to tackle kind of the underlying stories of the culture that we are living in, and really reimagine our the fundamentals. And what is a story? A story is an archetypal scenario, you could say, which places, which defines the relation between people, or human culture and nature, human culture and a transcendental realm, or the divine, whatever you want to call it, and also very importantly, it defines the relation between masculine and feminine. It defines how it relates to eros. So, if you look into each culture, those are the key places that make a culture either cruel or humane. Mm-hmm. And so this is those are the places where we can flip the switch into a non-violent or thriving regenerative direction. Because it is in those areas that we have been really fostering an attitude of separation and fear, whereas actually there is like when you think about love and sexuality, for example, we treat it now as a commodity, as it's filled with fear, with competition, but actually, if you think about it, this is a core realm of human desire, which is just, it is driven by this huge longing for unification, for transcendence. But as a culture, we can only get there and only stop this huge compensation of frustrated longing and anger if we have a consciousness and a societal structure which allows this longing to actually get anywhere. So we need social structures. And we need cultural stories where, for example, love and sexuality is no longer pitched against the idea of final judgment. In the end, the belief that in the end love will result in disaster. Eros will end in bloodshed. Those are still the mind patterns that we are conditioned by, but we can transform them if we see if we start to see the possibility what a trust-based culture can look like. I mean, love and sexuality doesn't stand alone, though. It's also important. Like, I'm not propagating like collective relationships therapy or something, but Eros is this vital life force which, when we really can open it consciously and in a space of trust, we realize that this is not confined to just like my body and my emotions and then maybe connects to another person, but it's really this life current which also connects me with animals, with plants, with the whole living world, not in the sense of sex, but in the sense of the capacity to develop empathy for another being. There is a sensual quality which interconnects, a sensual perceptiveness which interconnects this world, because it is a bodily world. It is a sensual world. Our sensuality is what we share with all living beings. But if the sensuality is denied, you create a world where we inflict pain and violence in the physical realm instead of celebrating the joy that sensuality could be. So if we change the erotic, our relation to Eros, we will automatically change our relation to animals. There will not be slaughterhouses in an erotically liberated world. We change our relation to water. We will no longer put it into straight canals which lead to floods and all of this, but we will allow water to flow freely. It is whatever we do to the outer is always a reflection of what is happening inside ourselves. It cannot be different. And whatever we can see in terms of a liberated world relies on how much we can free ourselves from the constraints of this kind of competition and fear-based society.
Let's get into the technological questions. Some very interesting stuff is happening at the moment with the rise of artificial intelligence. Mm-hmm. And it is said that 40 to 50% of people are going to lose their jobs in developed countries in the next 5 to 10 years. And I have two questions regarding that. One is what you think, if we manage to free a lot of our time, because robots are doing a lot of stuff, mm-hmm. what you think our time will be best employed doing. Mm. And the other one is, from your perspective, what makes a human unique, and what can a human do that a robot cannot do?
Okay, so I think it's actually a very interesting threshold that we are at, and I think it's quite likely actually that artificial intelligence will replace quite some of the labor force that we are having in place now, and I think it's actually a really great opportunity to kind of free people from like working a machine, but making humans more human. However, that it really depends on what kind of societal structure we live in. The more kind of dystopian the societal order becomes, the more the dystopian will be the answer to the question. And I'm sure that the ruling elites are thinking of how to get rid of all those deplorables, because and at the same time, imagine that half the people are not busy with like just thinking the whole time in terms of, okay, how do I work my job? How do I survive economically? I mean, it could be a moment of huge creative liberation where people can actually ask the question, what do I want to do with my life? What is my unique contribution to this world? People could engage in art and culture and creativity and building community. I mean, there would be a lot to be done in terms of unfolding our own genius when we no longer, in a way, compete with machines and kind of water down our consciousness, our brain, our sensitivity as we are doing now, But that really depends on what kind of social and cultural movement there will be to confront this dystopian outlook that we are having now in many regards with a real emancipatory, positive outlook into the future. And this is also, what we are trying to do with the Healing Biotopes project to show this different possibility. So maybe first to say that I think that like the whole digital revolution is actually in a way it's I see it as a precursor to a spiritual revolution. I think that the whole development of the digital revolution, that seems to have almost no end, even though I think it has an end. But this vast realm of possibility that they discovered in terms of how virtual reality can design and transform physical reality in terms of its massive communication networks and in terms of artificial intelligence. I think all of this wouldn't be possible if it wasn't based on some deeper base reality in a way, which would make this kind of technological development even possible. So there is something in the nature of the mind, in the nature of the spiritual structure of reality, if you will, where manifestation from imagination, where instantaneous telepathic communication and the increase of intelligence through interconnecting single beings, where this is part of an evolutionary stream. So it is, in a way, I think this technology is much more a part of organic life than we might often see. And so, we have the possibility to cooperate with that current of evolution, but it will also be really important for human consciousness to not only be amazed by all this possibility of technology that arises, but actually develop in that spiritual direction as well. I mean, Alan Watts put out this sentence where he said technology is only harmful to the degree that it is not developed from a space of unity. And if you see how much digital technology kind of can unify the world, but at the same time it deepens the fragmentation, you see what a spiritual revolution is necessary to kind of handle the digital revolution responsibly and meaningfully. And so answering to, and this kind of leads me to answer your question, which I think in a way robots can do a lot more than we think they could do. And at the same time, I think there is something about the quality of our consciousness, which, which I think a lot of it we are still fully exploring what is really unique about it, which you cannot codify reflective consciousness and the perceptiveness of the soul and sensual perceptiveness into a robot. I think machines can be extremely intelligent and imitate communication, a lot of human features, but there is something where I don't know, like the moment when two people fall in love because they have seen something in the soul of the other. I think a robot will never be able to come to this point, because this is when the depth of one divine spark meets the depth of another one. And with all our, grandiose idea of who we are as human beings, we are not able to play God in the way that we could codify that thing, because we are not even, with all our technical intelligence, we are not even closely conscious of what that moment actually is. So we need to develop so much more spiritually to understand what this special moment of consciousness is, that allows this the transcendence to even come closer to this question of what makes us different from a machine. And I think the enthusiasm of people in Silicon Valley, of the singularity movement and all of this, where they think, of course, we will reach the point soon where AI will overtake the world. They think in this way because they see the world as a machine. They don't even, there is a whole part of, especially also of a more feminine existence, which doesn't exist in the brain of these boys. I mean, and I find it really interesting that we have climate disruption, that we have the sixth mass species extinction at the same time as the explosion of digital technology. And one is the high flight of inspiration of man, and this civilization of driven by man's technical genius, and on the other side you have the living world crying in despair as a result of exactly that development. And at some point also the digital revolution will be shown its borders in terms of the material world that we are living in. And so I think, those sides really have to come together.
There's a lot of talk happening around virtual reality and augmented reality.
I mean, it's very interesting. I see it also kind of as a result of a certain leap of consciousness that happened in the last century in terms of what is really base reality. And I mean, the whole digital revolution, which then leads to virtual realities and all of this. I mean, it wouldn't have been possible without the discoveries of quantum physics in terms of the projective nature of reality. Actually we are discovering that everything that we see is even very solid in the so-called real world in the end is also just a virtual reality. So we have to be aware of that. And I think that kind of what is playing out now with virtual reality is humanity almost as an infant kind of, entering the realm of a very big insight. But we kind of, with the state of consciousness that that humanity is living in right now, this is, it will blow out our minds. It will just further the fragmentation, the alienation, the disconnect, psychological diseases, big time, unless, and this is on a psychedelic experience, you can just travel through all these hallucinations and you can get lost in them. But if you are centered in an even deeper place, which is outside the projections, the hallucinations, the different images of virtual reality, the place where this where the quality of in a way the self, that which you are, that which you are eternally, then you are able to not identify with the reality, with the virtual realities you see, but you can kind of venture through to the point of truth, and I think like
the form doesn't matter as much.
Well, the form, I don't think that you will indulge in virtual realities for the sake of virtual realities, but people indulge in virtual realities just as people get lost on trips in hallucinations. I think it's actually almost the same thing. When you have lost this inner, like the anchor in the self, the conscious orientation of a certain form of self-reflection and a sense of intention where you're headed in your life. And so I think until people come back to this point of consciousness, or even develop the necessity to come to this place again, of course, you will see the disintegration of everything, because it has to disintegrate, because the culture that we come from has forced patterns of life on us, which cannot be kept up anymore. They were directed against life, and they are coming down now. We live in the time of the big entropy on all levels, spiritual and ecological and social, political, economic. It will all fall apart. The question is there another unifying principle which is no longer domination, fear, constraint, but which really corresponds to this inherent, like innate longing for true unification, for unity in diversity? This is the question. Otherwise, virtual reality, the digital revolution, all of this, it will just blow out our minds until we have no idea anymore who we are, what we are. Mm-hmm. But the problem is not the virtual reality. The problem is the lostness, if you will, of humanity. And we need spiritual schools. We need centers where people can reconnect to that which is uniquely human, to that which is consciousness, to that which is the source of love and creates conditions for trust. Then we can use all the we are really entering a new era, and with unprecedented possibilities of technology, of consciousness. But in order to use them properly, we need this social foundation and this consciousness foundation that allows for meaning, for trust, for actually building love among people. Otherwise, we can talk about technology forever, and it will just end up destructively.
I really like that last answer.
Yeah.
And on that note, thank you so much for your answers, Martin, and your knowledge.
Yeah, thanks for your great questions.
Dear listener, I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to know more about Tamera and my experience there, I wrote a full article about it, and it's available on the Future Seeds website. The Future Seeds podcast is a project that is supported by its community of listeners. If you like the show and what it stands for, I invite you to head to www.futureseeds.news, where you can support the show for just $2 a month, be part of the Future Seeds community, connect with its amazing members and speakers, and enable this podcast to thrive. I thank you for your time and hope you enjoy the show and its exploration of alternative solutions to the world's greatest challenges.